Okay, hello folks. This is a video to introduce a hopefully really useful technique in Adobe Photoshop that you can use to take analog mark making out of sketchbooks on pieces of paper and essentially kind of recreate what it would look like if it was screen printed. It's a really useful way for you to take perhaps disparate elements from different pages of your sketchbook and start building up imagery and giving, things that might just be small sketches or bits of marks a whole new lease of life. It's relatively advanced, except that it's actually quite simple, and if you've never really used Photoshop before, hopefully it's a kind of foot in the door, something that's very useful for you, that you can have a go at and kind of expand out and begin to learn the rest of Photoshop from that point. So we're going to put a few images together. We're going to use this row of deck chairs in the sand, these blue deck chairs, and I'm going to kind of maybe put some sort of spray paint over the top of it. And I'm going to show you the wrong way to do it, which is what most people do, and then I'm going to show you the right way to do it. Just for clarity, I am looking at my previews in a program called Adobe Bridge, which looks like that, and it's something you'll get along with Creative Cloud when you have a Creative Cloud subscription. And Adobe Bridge is a really, really useful way. It's a much, much better file navigation system. It's like a really sort of souped up, brilliant finder. I have it open constantly. I never use the regular Mac finders. I never use this. It's much, much, much easier to use a kind of browser like this. On top of that, there are some really, really good functionality. You can make collections. You can see here I've got a Photoshop film collection, which is this collection here. These files are actually in all sorts of different places on my hard drive, but I've kind of collected them in a virtual collection here, so I use that sometimes. You have a whole load of export options, which are really useful. So I could take, I could take a 20 layered Photoshop file that was kind of 300 megabytes, and I can just drag it and drop it onto one of the export options, like a web export that I've set up, that will export it to a particular file at a particular smaller JPEG resolution that I can just upload to Instagram or upload to my website, which again I use all the time, these export options. So you don't have to open Photoshop and make a copy and save a copy and flatten the image. You just can kind of drag and drop onto these export options, and you get all sorts of different possibilities for saving. You can save them as TIFFs or JPEGs or PNGs. Anyway, that's Bridge. I'm not going to go into the whole functionality of it, but please do explore it. It's really, really useful. So I'm just going to open this image up into Photoshop. And what we want to do is also open this image up into Photoshop. And what I would like to do, first of all, is show you the wrong way of doing things, and then the right way of doing things. This has popped up into this window with a tab. So if I move it, you've got both images. More often than not, I'll pull this one out so I can sort of see both next to each other. So let's look at the wrong way of doing things. There are a number of selection methods in Photoshop, and each has its use case and has its strengths and weaknesses. What people might do, for example, is say, okay, so there's this AI selection tool, and maybe if I just drag a kind of lasso around here, it'll make a selection, and I can move that, and you'll see that it's really not good at all. We don't want this white paper. So you might say, okay, well, we'll refine that selection. We'll go to select and mask, and we'll refine it using this refine edge brush tool, which you know, on the surface of things, kind of looks good. That looks like a much better selection. However, let's okay that. And we'll drag and drop. So you can see if I drag this over, I'm still getting a kind of haloing, which I don't want. I don't want this grey paper. So we're going to look at a kind of better way of selecting things. Throw that away. Go back to here. Deselect. So one of the things I want to point out before we get into this way of working is that a little bit of file preparation. I want to make sure that my white is properly white, and to some extent my ink marks are nice and dense. I'd like you to look over here into the info panel. You've got a couple of readouts in here, lightness and A and B. Don't worry about what A and B mean. But here also you got hue, saturation and lightness. And as you can see, if I am scrolling on the actual canvas here, if you look at the lightness values, there are 95 with the LAB channel, with the LAB readouts, and 94% with the HSL readouts. That means that completely white would be 100% lightness, but we're at 95, which is very light grey. So we want to remedy that. If you don't see the info panel, you go to Windows and make sure info is ticked there. If you just see RGB readouts, which are kind of confusing and don't really make sense, you want to be going to panel options. I usually use lab, but HSL is useful too, or HSB, almost the same thing. So that's kind of going to tell you what colours are in your image or what lightnesses are in your image. So you can see I'm hovering over here, 95% light. If I go over the blacks, it's like more like 15%. So it's not fully black, it's like a very dark grey. So let's work at getting my whites to be white and my blacks to be a bit blacker. Again, like in Photoshop, there are always 100 ways to skin a cat. I'm just going to show you what I would do at this point. And I'm going to use a filter called Camera Raw Filter. This will open a sort of app within Photoshop called Camera Raw, which is normally used to process raw photographs that you would shoot with a DSLR. It's like a digital photo processing app. And I'm using it because it has really good masking and auto masking, better than actually in Photoshop. Again, if you look at the top right where I've got an info panel, you can see we are able to look at our lightness values up there at 93, 94%. If you don't see those up here, you can go click on this histogram and make sure that show lab color readouts is visible. So here we are. So what can I do? I can make the exposure brighter, right? Problem is, if I do that, as I push that up till it's still not 100%, look, it's 99%. If I push that right up, I'm actually losing a lot of stuff in the blacks here. I don't want to be doing that. As I push it up, I'm getting lighter and lighter. Don't want to be doing that. I'm going to double click and send it back to 0 again. A number of things I could look at. I could just change the whites, pull the whites up. That does a good job. I'm going to undo that. Highlights, that does quite a good job. Well, we're pretty good, we can do that. A couple of other things I could do, I could look at the curves. This is telling me that's my dark values, that's my light values. You can see most of this image is white, but you can see that this point up here is not full white. If I wanted it to be full white, I could move that up and you can see that it's really making my lights lighter. If I want to pull my blacks in and make them blacker, I can do that. And this is be my midtones. If I put a point in here, I can pull the midtones down or up. So I get a lot more control with a curve in here. But I'm going to double click that to undo, put that back. So that's not doing anything at this point, because I wanted to show you a thing that might be quite useful when you're scanning things and you want a bit more precision about what bits of the image get lighter and what bits don't. And that is in the masking area. So you can click masking here and you get options of the different masks. You can use gradient masks and linear masks. But I'm just going to click on brush and I'm going to make sure that auto mask is selected. So you can change the size of this brush and the feathering of how soft this brush is, whether it's hard brush or very soft brush, and the flow of the brush, which I'll put up to 80-ish. Big fat feather on it. And as I making sure that I'm painting on the let's put that up a bit actually. Making sure that I'm painting on the white area first. I actually want to lighten, and particularly in the corners, because this is a photograph actually rather than a scan. It's where it's darkest. I can change the size, might bring it down a little bit, just to paint in here. And you can see, because I've got auto mask selected, what you can see is that it's not actually selecting the blacks. It is selecting the white areas that I want, and it's leaving the blacks alone. So this pink preview that you see is the areas that I'm actually going to be affecting when I make a exposure change. So let's put the exposure up. Now when I put the exposure up, you can see that it's not doing much to my blacks. Much better. Put the highlights up. I might paint a little bit more in here. So now if I'm scrolling over, I'm looking up at my lightness up here, and I'm seeing that I've got 100%. That means it's pure white. Down here we're back to 95, so I'm going to put a bit more brushing in. I'm pretty happy with that. When I've finished in the mask area, I just click back on my edit panel. Now when I make adjustments, rather than them happening just in the masked area, if I make adjustments, again we're making global adjustments to everything. So in my white areas we're at 100%. In my black areas we are quite dark. Might want to be a little bit darker, so I'm going to just pull my blacks down just a little bit. You can see like so. I'm happy with that, so I'm going to click OK, and it applies that filter. Now, how do I get the spray paint off of the white background, retaining all the soft details in here, and but being able to change the colour? Instead of using these various selection methods, I'm going to go over and look at a panel called Channels. If you don't see Channels here, again go up to Window and make sure Channels is ticked. And we've got an RGB channel, a red channel, a green channel and a blue channel. For this, you don't need to understand what this is about, but if you want to know, it will be more useful to look at a colour image. Basically, each channel tells you how much of a particular colour, red, green or blue, is in the file. And when you put red, green and blue together, you get white light. And the various percentage mixes of that will give you all the colours under the rainbow. So if I switch off all these channels other than the blue channel, you can see I get a luminance map, basically saying where it's very bright there is lots of blue, where it's less bright there is not very much blue, and the mix of these, when you start adding them in, turns into the RGB channel. All we need to know is that basically the RGB channel, when you put red, green and blue together, the RGB channel is the lightness. You put 100% red, green and blue together, you will get pure white. So the RGB is basically what I would call a luminance channel. Luma channel tells you how much brightness there is. And what's cool about these is that you can hold down Command on your keyboard right next to the spacebar. You get this little sign saying if you click on this you're going to get a selection. So here we are, we'll click on it, and so that has selected all the white stuff, or the lights, the highlights of my artwork. I don't want the lights, I want the darks. So I'm going to have to flip the selection around, invert the selection. So here's another little thing that came along with Photoshop sort of 2 iterations ago. It's called the contextual taskbar, and it will probably pop up. If you don't see it, again in window, there it is, contextual taskbar, make sure that is ticked. And basically what the contextual taskbar is a series of commands that Photoshop thinks might be useful at this point, given that you've got a selection. And one of these, happily, is invert selection. It's also up here, select, inverse. They call it inverse in the menu and invert in the taskbar, but it does the same thing. So if I click on that, what's happened now is it's flipped the selection around, so it's not selecting the whites, it's selected the blacks. So I'm going to make a new layer. I have pink selected, which I might as well leave, but you could be any colour. And again, look at the contextual taskbar. It also has the option to fill. That would be up here, edit, fill. But when I click here, fill, I can do fill with pattern, or fill with colour, or fill with foreground colour or background colour. I know my foreground colour here is pink, so I'm just going to click foreground colour. And so it's filled with pink. Normally on my keyboard I would hit Command D, which would deselect things. I also see that it has this option in the contextual taskbar, so if you just want to click deselect, you now have no selection. But you have a new layer with no white in it at all. It has been lifted off of your background layer, and you can move it around and you can cut bits out and you can put it onto different files and you can do stuff with it, and you have no white paint anymore, and you get also beautiful perfect edges. Basically every subtlety that was in your original grey file is retained in your new coloured one. Something I want to point out, you can see that it's very slightly transparent, and the reason it's very slightly transparent is because I left it deliberately to be like this. You can see here we don't have pure black, we have whites and greys, we have some darker greys, maybe somewhere in this file there's pure black, but it looks like maybe not. So when I'm using those channel selections, basically it's seeing greys as levels of transparency, which for us is kind of really useful because it means that this is acting as if you were putting kind of real paint on. You know, sometimes you put paint on and it's not completely opaque. You might want to put another layer on, another layer on. Well, the blacker this is in the first place, the more opaque your colour will be. So I'm going to leave it as it is because I like just, it feels a bit more realistic if it's not completely black actually. I don't want to take all of this, I just want to take maybe this middle bit. So here's where I use a different selection method. I'm going to use just a really rough lasso. I'm going to sling that round there, like that. And with my move tool, or V on the keyboard, I'm going to grab that, cut it out, drop it on there, and now we have a kind of like as if I've spray painted on top of this image. And we don't get any of the manky white paper, we just have pure colour with the same subtle spattering that the original spray paint had. This can be transformed. Command T on your keyboard will bring up the transform. You can rotate. You can scale. If you click on the warp mode here, you can pull out handles and kind of start bending things. It's kind of useful. If I maybe want to straighten this out a little bit, like so, or I can stretch bits. And then when I take it back off warp mode, I go back to regular stretching. So I'm just going to do this. And when I'm happy with it, I hit return on the keyboard and it's transformed it. So what if I want to change the colour of this? What if I decide I don't want pink, I want a different colour? Well, like with everything in Photoshop, again, there's a dozen different ways of doing that. I'm going to show you some simple methods, then I'm going to get slightly more complicated. We're going to look at a little bit of layer management, look at introduce a couple of new concepts, but essentially because it's on a floating layer, we can use the same holding down command on the keyboard and we can get a selection. Watch, if I hold it, I'm pressing command on my keyboard and nothing's happening because I'm hovering over this bit of the layer. However, if I hover over the actual little thumbnail and hold down command, if I click it, I can select everything in that layer. And again, this selection, although it's only showing me a kind of rough edge, it's actually selecting all this subtlety as well. It's selecting all the pixels plus all the transparency. It's going to be exactly the same delicacy as was in layer 1. I'm going to make a new layer. I'm going to switch that one off. I'm going to pick a different colour. Let's go with like a bright yellow. And hit OK. And I'm going to fill it with the foreground colour. And I'm going to deselect it. So now I've made a yellow one. That's the kind of simplest, slightly clunky way of doing things, but it's easy. There's just a number of steps. But I'm going to show you, let's throw that away and go back to pink. Let's look at another way of doing that where I can play with the colour kind of real time and see what it looks like on the image. Make the selection. There it is. And then I'm going to add a solid colour adjustment layer. So down here, you've got a number of things you can do to your layers. You can put layer masks on, you can put group things, you can add layers, you can throw layers away. This one opens a menu of adjustment layers. And I'm going to put a solid colour adjustment layer on. And at the moment, hang on, I'm going to cancel this because what I'm going to do is make the selection. And I'm going to switch that off so that I don't get some pink halos. And I'm going to go solid colour. And you can see that I've got a solid colour adjustment. But it's got a layer mask attached to it, which is the selection I just made. So where it's black, you don't see the colour. Where it's white, you do see the colour. I can now play around with my colours until I can change the saturation, the hue, the lightness. I could scroll through until I get exactly the right colour that I want. I quite like this blue because the pink because it's complements with the blue. I might want to be a bit lighter like that. And so what's useful is because I can see it real time on the image rather than just looking at a colour picker. I can scroll through and get that colour really accurate. And when I click OK, there's a solid colour adjustment layer with a layer mask attached to it. So that's one way of doing it. I'm going to put that away. I'm going to open this one now. And I'm going to open another JPEG that I prepared earlier, so I know this is, I'm not going to go through that whole lightning procedure, because I know this is pure white and that's nice and black. But there we go, we've got the channels, which I can click, I hold down Command and click on the channels, and I've selected the whites. Don't forget, you need to invert it, and that selects the darks. And then I can make a new layer. I'm going to hit D on my keyboard, which just gives me black and white, and then I'm going to go fill with the foreground colour, which is going to fill it with black, and then I'm going to deselect. And now when I switch that off, I've lifted the ink off of the paper and it's hovering in space, and I can grab that layer, chuck the whole thing on. Notice that the blobs disappear off the edge of the canvas, right? So let's situate this blob semi off the canvas, and let's make a selection of it, and let's make a new layer, and let's pick a colour like we did before. Let's pick some kind of yellow, and we're gonna fill it with the foreground colour, and we're going to deselect, switch that off. Now when I move this, you'll see it cut it off because it was off the canvas and it didn't get selected. So that's a little bit of a problem. I didn't want that to happen. So I'm going to throw that away. I'm going to go back to where we were. So we have our blobs. I can make a solid colour adjustment layer like we did before there, solid colour. But this time I made it without a selection active. So notice the difference. If I make a selection and I go solid colour adjustment layer, we have a solid colour with a layer mask, and you can see that if I move it around, actually now it's retained, because I didn't do a fill, it's retained all of the layer, which is kind of useful. So let's get another image. Let's get this. You'll notice that I only have a grey channel here. That's because it is a grayscale document. There you go, grayscale. It's not RGB colour. Doesn't really matter. The grey channel will do the same thing. I can hold down Command, click on the grey channel. Remember, we want the lights, the blacks, not the lights. So we invert it and make a new layer. And hitting D on my keyboard, because here I've got a what was yellow but now it's gone grey. D gives me black and white, and I fill it with the foreground colour, and I hit deselect, and I've lifted that stuff off there and drag that layer, chuck it on there. It says the target document has a different depth than the source document. This way, blah 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 blah. Yes, that's fine. So we can start building up screen prints. That's just black at the moment, but again, I can make a selection by holding down Command, select, give myself a solid colour adjustment layer, kind of into a yellow and pink thing at the moment. So there we go. We can start building things up. So it's actually quite useful to point out here, because my file on the edges wasn't pure white, I have this very light film of pink. There is ways I can deal with that, particularly if it's on a colour adjustment layer, and I will deal with that now. I'll show you how to deal with that. So that's a layer mask. Remember where black is concealing, white is revealing. That's the rhyme. Black conceals, white reveals, if you can remember that. A couple of things you could do. You could paint with black on that layer. So let's go to a brush tool, brush, making sure you're on the layer mask. Keep doing that. That has to be selected, has to have a little white line around it. Now I'm checking you're painting with black, flip that round. Now I'm painting with black, and I'm painting that out. Now I'm going to move over here and look at this edge, and with my brush tool click on brush, paint with black, and it's making that grey just disappear there. There are other ways to do it, but I think that's enough for now. So hopefully you can see how you can really get something that looks a lot like a screen print would, and take all sorts of marks from your sketchbook and start building up. They don't have to have photography behind them. You could just have white sheet, you know, a blank sheet of paper, like so. You could start just kind of building up, taking bits out of your sketchbook and building up sort of multi-layered files, being able to change the colour whenever you want. Double click on it, change the colour real time. So hopefully that's useful, and you get a little window of useful usage that you can then sort of expand and expand and expand until you know more and more and more about Photoshop.